Welcome to part 3 of this series I'm calling Understanding the Guitar. Now, you need to have watched the first 2 videos to keep up with this one, most likely. The first video we talked about root notes and octaves all over the guitar. The second video we talked about perfect fifths and where they are on the guitar. And this is going to be the third of the structural intervals we're going to be talking about. First one being the octave. Second one being the perfect fifth. We talked about the perfect fourth as well. So I guess this is actually the fourth structural interval. We're kind of waiting on talking more about the fourth for down the road. So at the moment, let's concentrate on octave, fifth, and today we're going to be talking about the third. Now, unlike the octave and the fifth, there are 2 different thirds. There's technically another fifth interval, the flatted fifth, but that is really kind of a specialized interval and does not show up anywhere near as much as the perfect fifth. So for the time being, I'm going to leave the flatted fifth on the shelf, and we're just going to think of it as there's one kind of fifth interval that you need to worry about right now. But there are 2 third intervals that are equally as common in music: the major third and the minor third. And again, this is a structural interval. And what I mean by that is that it is more useful for building chords and for building bass lines, the bigger structures of music, than it is for playing melodies, because we already saw that it's pretty hard to play a melody with just the first 4 notes that we've been looking at. No matter what you do, it's going to end up kind of sounding like a bass line. Now, as we add this third, we're going to be finishing the main notes that make up basic chords, but rather than playing scales, what we're going to be playing is arpeggios. So as we add the third, we're going to be able to play all the notes of a chord, either as a chord or individually. But yet, it's still kind of a structural thing. We're still kind of talking about the notes of a chord. Haven't quite gotten to the point where we're talking about scales and more melodic things. Okay, so enough of that. Where do you find the thirds? I don't really want to get into the theory behind it too much. So I think you'll just kind of take it from me that this is yet another interval that is very structurally basic to music. It's another fundamental division of the fretboard. And if you are curious about the math and the theory behind it, one thing you could look into is something called the overtone series or the harmonic series. And what that is basically talking about is in any given note, if you play a note, you're hearing not only the note, but you're hearing a series of overtones. So in other words, think of the main note, which is sometimes called the fundamental. Think of that as like the pebble hitting the water. And then there are ripples of quieter sounds spreading out from that are part of the sound you're hearing. And if you've ever messed around with harmonics on the guitar, these, where you don't press down the string, but you hover over you lightly touch above the fret, and you get these bell tones in certain frets. What you're doing there is you're isolating the overtones. So this would be the fundamental, this E. Then this would be an octave above. It's called the first harmonic. And we have other harmonics here, here. What you'll find if you look into those harmonics, in other words, notes that are hiding kind of in the main note that you hear, is that the third is in there too. So another interval that's basically built into the physics of music, and that's what makes it so structurally important. Okay, so let's get down to finding these on the neck. We'll first look at them on one string, but like the other intervals we looked at, they aren't always really practical to play on one string, and you're going to want to be playing them across different strings. But let's start with this good old A root note. The third is 1, 2, 3, 4 frets above. The major third is 4 frets above the root. So if we're starting with A as our root, The major third is on the 9th fret. Okay? The minor third is 1 fret below that. So you're going to have 3 frets that you're counting up from. 1, 2, 3. So 5th fret to 8th fret. And it might be worth spending a few minutes here just listening to the sound of those 2 intervals. And because this is where the concepts of major and minor enter into music. When we were playing those power chords made of a first, a root, an octave, and a 5th, that's not a major chord or a minor chord. It's not actually technically even a chord because it's really just 2 notes, and you need 3 unique notes to make a chord. So it's really just kind of a reinforced tonic note. Now we're going to start adding one more note to either play a major or a minor chord. So the third is the interval that determines whether a chord is major or minor, or whether a scale is major or minor. And you can hear it in that the major third, da, da, which is the do, re, mi, is the third note of a major scale, do, re, mi, is more open and maybe bright sounding than the flat third. Minor third, those are the opening notes of Green Sleeves, if you know that song. Da, 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 da. The song that I hear when I hear the major third keeps going to the 5th, which is Rock Around the Clock. Okay. So those are the 2 sounds that we're adding and that we're going to find on the neck. So let's look at where the thirds are across the strings. If you have a root here, then the formula you want to remember is the major third is going to be on the next string over and down 1 fret. So it's a pretty comfortable little, you can play with your first and second fingers. I'm just going to find all the A's. Okay, now watch out though, because if you remember, third string to second string is always different. So if the main rule is that they're staggered by a fret, you always have to raise that second string. So it's going to be 2 notes on the same fret. Okay, and then we're back to the same shape. Okay, so that's 2 different ways to play a major third. You can jump up, and that I tend to use my pinky. So you're going to be skipping 3 frets in between for a major third. Or next string over. Okay. Minor third, first and pinky. You might recognize that from one of the main blues scale minor pentatonic patterns. So in other words, this is a minor third. Okay. So on 1 string, it's that shape. On 2 strings, you're going to start with the root, you're going to go to the next string, but you're going to drop 2 frets. So A on the 5th fret, the C, the minor third, is on the 3rd fret. Oop. Okay, now watch out here. Instead of going down 2 frets, you only have to go down 1 fret, since that second string has a different relationship. Okay. So, once you spend a little time finding those, the major thirds and the minor thirds, you're going to want to incorporate that into the other intervals that we've looked at. Let's look at playing these intervals harmonically, because this is actually going to be the place you should start. So in other words, where we took the root and the octave and the 5th and we made these shapes out of them that we play as chords, let's look at taking just 1 root, 1/3, and 1/5 and making chords out of that, okay? So let's start with this one. And this shape I'm going to start with my pinky on this A. I'm going to use my third finger to play the third. And then I'm going to go to the fifth is going to be the E, 2nd fret 4th string. So that's one way to play a first, a major third, and a fifth. And that same shape would work on the other strings. But now here you have to be careful because we're spanning 3 strings, including the 3rd to 2nd string. So instead of this stretched shape, we're going to have 3 frets in a row. Root, 3rd, 5th, root, 3rd, 5th. And then finally, all right, now notice, if you know your A major chord, that the notes I'm playing right here are the top 3 strings of an A major chord. And in fact, all of these shapes that we just looked at are pieces of chords you might know. Because this sequence, root, 3rd, 5th, is called a major triad. And all the beginner chords, all the major chords you learn, G, C, D, E, A, when you're first learning guitar, are triads, major triads. They're called triads because they only have 3 unique notes. They've got the root, the 3rd, and the 5th in some kind of order. A lot of times they have extra roots and extra 3rds and extra 5ths in there. So for instance, this E major chord has got an E and an E and an E, 3 E's. It's got 1/3. There's that little shape. Okay, it's a G sharp is the 3rd. And then it has 2 B's, which is the 5th. So still only 3 unique notes: E, G sharp, and B. Major triad. If you want to make a major breakthrough in playing guitar, being able to play major and minor triads all over the guitar will take you a huge way down the road. So we just looked at 1, which would be root, 3rd, 5th, root, 3rd, 5th, root, 3rd, 5th, root, 3rd, 5th, root, 3rd, 5th. If you want to convert that to minor, you just lower the 3rd. So instead of that, you're going to go middle note of this sequence is the 3rd, right? And or I know I just went through that quickly, but if you go back and learn those major forms and then simply lower the middle note by a half step, by 1 fret, you'll be able to find those shapes. And I think working them out on your own is a big part of this, to be honest. Okay, so that would be called root position, a root position triad, starting with the root, going to the 3rd, going to the 5th. So in the sequence that they appear in a scale, for instance. In sequential order, right? So there's 2 other orders we can play them in. We can play them 3, 5, 1. And we can play them 5, 1, 3. And you can actually make kind of a game out of it. If you start with this root position triad, notice we're always using these little sets of 3 strings. Well, this is 1, 3, 5. So think of the next note you would run into on each string. So 3, the 1 would run into the 3, the 3 would run into the 5, and then the 5 would run into the 1. And so you find those. We have this. So this would be called a first inversion major triad. And then the 3 becomes the 5 becomes the 1, and the 1 becomes the 3, and we get a second inversion triad. And again, those shapes are going to stay the same on the strings. The only thing you have to make allowance for is the difference between the 3rd and 2nd strings. And then you're going to lower the 3rd, whichever note that is. So for instance, if I'm doing this one where the 3rd is in the middle, then I'm going to lower that down. But if I'm doing this one where the 3rd is the top note, I'm going to lower it. Right? I'm going to do 5, 1, 3, then I'm going to lower the third. Spend some time working this out on your own. You can find diagrams. You could draw the diagrams out yourself. I actually think it's a really good experience to try and find these things on the neck yourself. Your ear is going to tell you when you're on the right track. If you play the wrong thing, you're going to know, because you've heard these sounds your entire life. Major triads, minor triads are very, very familiar to us. So spend some time with these third shapes. You're going to end up with a whole bunch of little 3-note shapes. Some of them are going to be really familiar because all these shapes you learn down here with your beginner chords, as I said before, those are all made from triads. So for instance, this D chord, which is usually a 4-string chord, right? If you just play these top 3 notes, well, it's a second inversion triad. So what that means is this is the 5th, this is the 1st, and this is the 3rd. So whatever note you're playing on the 2nd string is the name of the chord. So this is an A note right here. So if I do that little D chord shape, I'm playing an A major triad. Because this is a D major triad, A major triad, G major triad, F major triad, E major triad. And I know a lot of musicians that think pretty much strictly like this in terms of shapes, you know? Here's an A major chord. If I take those top 3 strings, that's root, 3rd, 5th. So if I turn that into like a little movable shape, root, 3rd, 5th, that's a little movable root position triad. And then if I take, say, an E chord, E major, well, those top 3 strings are 3, 5, 1. So if I make that into a little movable shape, then it's like this, holding down these 2 strings and then putting my 2nd finger down. So in this case, I'm playing the 3rd fret, and then I'm holding down the 4th fret, and that's the top part of a G chord, an A chord, C chord, D chord. So think about how powerful that is in terms of, they're just these little 3-chord shapes, but if you combine the major forms and the minor forms, and we'll talk more about how to sequence these once we start talking about scales, but these little shapes are behind an awful lot of guitar parts, accompaniment, all kinds of things that you've heard. So I hope that makes sense. Please join me for the next video. Thanks a lot for watching.